where other aircraft are. So unless, maybe the helicopter was flying without it because of some, I've not been in the military, frankly, and they might have some reason to turn off an ADS-B transponder. But those two pilots, the helicopter and the jet, should have seen each other on their displays. Right. And the ground crew, the tower crew at Reagan should have deconflicted them.
Yeah. You talk about a commuter plane, John, and a commuter jet like this. And, back in the old days, you would say, well, you had these twin engine props and they weren't as sophisticated as some of these, the Boeing 737s, 47s, and the Airbus airplanes. But nowadays, when you talk about the Bombardier CRJ700 twin, this is a very sophisticated airline. It has got every bell and whistle that the major airlines and the big jets have.
Right. It's got those glass cockpits, which are, state of the art. And it's one of the reasons that it's so easy and so precise to fly these days, because you literally are looking at a map. You can program the instrument approach into the airport, and you can watch on the map. The pilot can monitor on the map as the plane is turning itself to align with, in this case, runway 33, as I understand it, but they didn't get there because, there was an obstacle.
Right. And just by the way, Jennifer Griffin is now reporting, and I'm going to read this, what she put in. She says the Pentagon is now checking on a report that a U.S. military Black Hawk helicopter was involved in the crash. Of course, we have told you that the military has come out, the FAA, the NTSB come out saying a Sikorsky H-60 was involved. Joint Base Bowling, Jennifer says, is on the opposite side of the river from Reagan National Airport. So when you have that kind of, you have that kind of military base, when you have an active airport that is very busy, there would be communication between the two, correct?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. There should be. And, the problem is those systems are only as good as the people who are running them. I mean, I've used the wrong frequency coming into an airport in the past because, it takes one click of the dial and you're not on the right frequency. And that, could have been what happened here. It's way too early to say, but it's obviously very, very tragic. And, it brings to mind the Air Florida crash back in the early 1980s,
right,
when that Air Florida, I think it was a 737, went into the Potomac. It's just so terrible this time of year.
Yeah, and the Air Florida plane was taking off when it clipped the bridge and it went into the Potomac, and there were survivors on that plane. This plane was coming in. John, I don't know the altitude. The FAA hasn't released any of that. We're about to, or we're trying to clear this video because there was video taken of the collision. We don't have that yet, but it becomes less likely to be a survivable crash when you're at some distance in the air and the plane is hit and the plane is just then suddenly falling. And I'm wondering, John, and we're going to talk to Specialist Armin Kurdian about this because he's a search and rescue specialist, but I'm wondering if the dive teams go into the water immediately, do you know anything about how search and rescue works right now?
Oh, I know a little bit. I did a little bit of, sample search and rescue diving when I was in Miami, when I lived in Miami. They'll get in there as soon as they can, but they've got to have a pretty good idea of where the jet is. I can't tell from the video that we have on the air right now whether anybody has that pinpointed. But, some of the video that I've seen taken from the Kennedy Center suggests that there was an explosion in the air when the two collided. And, if that's the case, it would render the likelihood of survival a lot less likely.
Yeah. And it's interesting because now you're reading some of the stats. They're sending us some numbers saying the Sikorsky UH-60 Blackhawk is a 4-blade, twin-engine, medium-lift utility military helicopter manufactured by Sikorsky Aircraft. Modified versions have also been developed for the U.S. Navy, the Air Force, and the Coast Guard. And it's also important to point out that the Blackhawk can carry up to 15 people, including 2 pilots, 2 crew chiefs, and 2 rescue specialties. So if you combine the possibility, the capacity of the CRJ 700 with 78 passengers, potential of maybe 4 additional crew members, and then you have 15 or you have a higher number or lower number on this Black Hawk helicopter, I mean, you are looking at a significant loss of life in this type of crash, potentially, John.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just so mind-boggling that something like this could happen, right there in such tightly controlled airspace, as you mentioned. And Trace, you were talking about the fact that there have been proposals to close Reagan Airport and move it somewhere else where there's a little more space. And what happens typically is members of Congress don't want that. They like the access. If they're going to get out on a Thursday or a Friday and fly home for the weekend, they like to be right there at Reagan Airport. It's 10 minutes from the Capitol, and they're the ones who keep it open.
Yeah. A few months ago, I flew in there, and you're right. I mean, it's one of those things where you get in the cab and you are at the Capitol, you are in downtown in minutes. And so It is extraordinarily convenient. And a lot of these debates have been put on hold, John, because quite frankly, I mean, you and I right now are living, at least in the United States, in the safest aviation period in history. I mean, we talk about the last crash being that Colgan Air crash back in 2009 going up to Buffalo. And that also resulted in some dramatic changes in aviation and safety and checklists and so on and so forth. But you go back before that, and right now for the past 25 years, it has been extraordinarily safe. And we talk about close calls a lot, and we talk about, maybe they need to improve some of the runways and some of the communications. But it has been really safe flying in America over the past quarter century.
Right. And if you look at the plane crash that just took place in in South Korea a couple of weeks ago, there were, to my mind, a myriad of mistakes made even in the construction of that particular airport. And those kinds of things have pretty much been eliminated in the United States. And you're right, Trace. I mean, it is an incredibly safe way to get around. Aviation in the United States is about as safe as you can get. And this aberration tonight, this crash of a jetliner with a helicopter, it's just mind-boggling.
Yeah, it really is. John, if you could stand by for us, we'd appreciate it. We're just going to reset for those who are just joining us. You see, we have 2 scenes here. They're both live. One is moments ago, rather, because they are putting boats into the Potomac River. They are putting dive teams into the Potomac River. The search is now at full scale. On the right, you are looking live. This is Arlington, Virginia. That is the other side of the river view, apparently, of DCA, Reagan National, where we are told tonight that a regional jet, a CRJ 700, which is run by PSA Airlines but is a commuter airline for American Airlines, it flew tonight under the number 5342 from Wichita, Kansas. And now Reuters is reporting there were 60 passengers scheduled to be on that jet that crashed near Reagan's National Airport, 60 passengers. And again, we talked about this, 2 pilots, the potential of 2 flight attendants, 1 or 2 flight attendants, and there you're talking about 65. You add to that the Black Hawk helicopter, the UH-60, and again, you're talking about a capacity of 15 to 17 passengers on board that. I want to bring in Mark Meredith. He's live for us at the scene to give us the latest on what he's hearing and seeing. Mark.
Trace, good evening to you. We are just south of the runway here at Reagan National. We are on the Virginia side, one of the approach paths that this aircraft would have likely have taken. Looking at some of the flight radar apps, the apps that track aircraft all over the country, you can see the approach that this aircraft, the CRJ-700, as you mentioned, a regional commuter jet that all of the major airlines use. This one coming from Wichita, Kansas out to DCA. It is a little bit of a longer flight, but also something well within the aircraft's range. Some of the videos that we have seen out on the scene show that collision between the helicopter as well as this regional jet. I know we're still working to get that video in, but it really shows to you the magnitude of the search and rescue effort now underway. We are just south of the airport. I'd say less than a half mile. There's a marina here where there's dozens of people that have simply shown up to see what is happening, because across the river and as far as the eye can see, you can see the red and blue police lights, the red fire department lights, as well as above. We've got multiple helicopters, probably about 300 to 400 feet in the air, that have been circling, but we haven't, from at least our vantage point, seen the boats out on the river. They're likely on the other side, Trace, of where we are. What you and the previous guests were just talking about is so notable because, yes, Reagan Airport is one of the busier airports, not only here in the DMV, but of course all across the eastern seaboard. And there have been concerns in the past about how much traffic was going in. Every couple of months, there's been a debate about whether or not to even raise the number of aircraft that can go out of this airport. You can imagine, as you and your guests talked about, this airport is in demand because it is so close to city center. You can get from DCA downtown within about 10 to 15 minutes. So what we will also be waiting to see, of course, is what kind of reaction the FAA is going to provide. They're already telling us, Trace, that the NTSB, the National Transportation Safety Board, will be leading this investigation. But you can name the acronym, and I would bet all three letters will be out here by the night's end as they try to figure out exactly what happened and piece it together. What we have also seen out here when we were coming to the airport, Trace, I live in the city itself. I was basically Ubering trying to get out here. I could see emergency vehicles from Union Station all the way down in the tunnels coming in, so an indication that it was going to be an all hands on deck, as you can imagine, with the search and rescue underway. Some of the local media is reporting that they've been able to pull some survivors out of the water. We haven't, as far as I know, been able to confirm that. And again, from our vantage point here, we are still waiting to see how close the emergency traffic is going to be able to get. But we're seeing these helicopters going overhead, circling every few seconds, an indication that they're looking for anything in the water that may be a sign of somebody related to this crash, whether it's from the helicopter, the Sikorsky, or the CRJ-7, as you were just talking about. I've also been told from congressional sources that they have some of the Kansas lawmakers on their way out here. They want to know what's happening firsthand, not only for their constituents' sake, but they'll oversee the NTSB and the FAA through their various committees. D.C., as Sean Hannity was talking about, is such a company town because so many people fly in and out of here. The White House already very much aware of what's going on. Vice President Vance already talking, Trace, about offering prayers and support for the victims here. But at this point, still the search and rescue effort underway as we try to piece together, like everybody, what's going on. And Trace, because there are so many cameras out here at Reagan Airport, it's a beautiful airport to view because you can see all the planes coming in. So you often see a lot of people have webcams set up. A lot of the local media use it for their weather reports, so you can see out into the airport. So it would not surprise me that we would see multiple videos of this crash coming in. And what it looked like, Trace, was that the aircraft was approaching again from the south over National Harbor area. There's like an MGM casino out there, some shopping area. It's a typical approach pattern. It's not really out of the ordinary. But from the videos that I'm seeing posted online, there was an indication that air traffic was also taking off. This airport so busy, so it looks like a lot of traffic was happening at the same time right before this crash happened, a few minutes before 9 p.m. or roughly about an hour and a half ago. Trace.
Yeah. Mark Meredith, stand by if you will. We'll get back to you as the news warrants. What Mark is describing there is exactly what we are seeing here, which is this all hands on deck rescue effort. They're putting boats into the water. They are now putting dive teams in the water. And there are reports, as Mark was saying, some of the affiliates there, that there's a potential, a possibility that some survivors, maybe one, maybe more, have been pulled out of the water. Again, we don't know if that's accurate. It is a report that we are conveying to you. We don't know if it's accurate. And if it is accurate, we do not know the condition of the people that they have pulled out or are pulling out of the water. But I want to play the video now because we have kind of zoomed in on this. We're being very careful. We want to play the video. Watch at the bottom lower of the screen, and you will see what appears to be the collision here as we play this breaking news. And if I can watch this and have John Scott Scott, if he's watching this as well, bring him in to get some analysis on what we're looking at here. So this, and if I'm right, Tracy, this is the video. Is that correct? So the video is coming in. Do we know how far into the video we'll see the crash? Do you know where on the screen that we are looking at? Okay, so here it is. You can see on the right hand, you can see the plane coming in, and then you can see what appears to be a crash right there below that plane, which was potentially taking off. And then right below, right above what appears to be a bridge, you see the crash of the plane, which at that vantage point appears to be pretty low to the water when it actually happens. So if there's anything to look for good news-wise in this, the lower that plane was to the water, the better the survivable opportunity is for the passengers on board. With that, John Scott, I'm not sure if you saw that, but it looks like you had the plane, the CRJ-700 Twin, coming down, and it appears that the helicopter might have been going up. Now, again, that's not clear because the video is not very clear, but that looks like kind of the scenario that we're looking at. What do you think?
Yeah, that is what it looks like to me, Trace. It looks like the helicopter was ascending. It normally, it would be easy for the pilots of the CRJ not to be able to see the helicopter below them. That's always, there's a saying in aviation that you'll never see the aircraft that hits you, because there are always blind spots in every plane. I am a little surprised that the helicopter apparently did not see that jetliner, because, the wing lights, the strobe lights, everything is flashing, and the helicopters. I've flown in a Black Hawk, haven't flown one, but I've flown in one, and they have pretty good visibility out the front windows. So I'm flabbergasted. It's very sad.
And this is the video. We're zooming in on this now. We've got as close as we can get to this. The video again, you can see right there. Right there is the explosion, and it's hard. It looks like a plane, John Scott, is taking off. And it looks like when that plane takes off, it appears is that the helicopter or whatever hit the helicopter was going up as the plane was coming down. So is it a fair assessment to say in a Black Hawk helicopter that the ceiling is as blind as the downside of the helicopter, because they would be going up and the plane would be coming down, where the plane could not see the helicopter, but the helicopter could potentially see the plane?
Right. Again, the view through the windscreen of the helicopter should have allowed those pilots to see it. Now, I have a nephew who flies Black Hawks, and very often they fly with the night vision goggles on and so forth, and vision can be restricted. But, in this case, they're flying around suburban Washington, D.C., and in fact, that chopper base that I believe it was Chad Pergram was talking about is the one that flies around the Secretary of Defense and the Army Secretary. I mean, that's one of the that's part of their bailiwick. So, these are going to be experienced pilots, and they're not necessarily going to be just training at random at night over Washington, D.C. They would do that out somewhere in a much more rural area. So the fact that they did not see that jet coming is just astounding to me. The jet is clearly on final approach. He's very low. I don't know the final approach fix there into runway 33. I haven't looked at it, but
right.
They were clearly very close to landing, and the helicopter somehow got in the way. Yeah.
It did. John, stand by if you would. I want to bring in Armin Kurdi into the conversation because Armin is a specialty. We don't have Armin Kurdi, and we'll try to get him back. So, John, stay with us if you would. But,
sure.
But we are now hearing, John, that from the NBC affiliate, and again, we have not independently verified this, that 4 people were pulled from the water after the collision near Washington Reagan Airport. And again, we don't know if those people were on board the aircraft. We don't know if they were on board the helicopter. Right now, it's just unknown. But NBC is reporting that 4 people were pulled from the water after the collision near Washington's Reagan Airport. That in itself, to me, when you see a collision like this midair, is fairly astounding. And we don't know the condition, John. We don't know their condition. We don't know if these people were in fact alive and pulled and rescued. We're still waiting for those details. But the fact that they are saying 4 people pulled from the water versus 4 bodies pulled from the water is somewhat significant and, at least to me, surprising. John?
Yes.
Okay, we just lost.
All right.
We lost John Scott. I want to bring in first responder.
Sorry, I'm getting some competing.
Yeah, when John's phone gets back up, let us know. Let's bring in first responder and former FEMA External Affairs Officer Jason Pack. And Jason, are you hearing anything else about this? I mean, they've been very transparent in the early going of this crash. I mean, I've covered plane crashes going all the way back to ValueJet in Florida, way back in the early 90s, where it took days to get any information out. They're trying to put information out as quickly as they possibly can, which I think is a good thing. It's also very disturbing for people who are likely at DCA Reagan right now, waiting for their loved ones to arrive and being taken to some private room to be counseled and to be informed of exactly what happened. Jason, what can you tell us?
Trace, that's right. As someone who flew this route the past 18 months when I was wrapping up my career at FBI, I flew into that same terminal, the E terminal, brand new there, just fixed on a regional jet on the same approach. I was coming from Knoxville to D.C., and I've flown this route many times, so it's very chilling to see that same aircraft and everything. The good news is there's time. The time is of the essence now, and the good news is 32 years ago or 33 when we had the Florida air crash, we didn't have as good of technology. The first responders had limited equipment. Now we have these sonar scanners. We have the FLIR and all these advanced technologies that the rescuers, you saw the Fairfax County rescue boats, you saw DC Fire, you saw Arlington. All these departments have the water rescue capabilities. The U.S. Coast Guard also having capabilities out there. So they have these advanced technologies, and they're going to give anybody who could survive the best chance at it out there with all the technology and all the manpower they have out there right now. You see in times like this, these incidents, they'll set up incident command to kind of control the chaos with this. They train for these types of things. Never do they want to or have to, but emergency services are ready and they practice these things, and they practice this interagency coordination through the incident command system. So you'll have these commands being set up right now. They'll divide it up into sectors. They'll make assignments, and they'll hopefully get as many people out as they can as time goes on.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Jason, stand by if you would. Tracy, do we have John Scott back on the phone with us? We do not. But do we have Armin Kurdian back on the phone? Okay, so let's bring in Kyle Bailey, who's an aviation expert. I want to read this to you, Kyle, because we just got this from the Associated Press, and it says, quoting here, in audio from the air traffic control tower around the time of the crash, a controller is heard asking the helicopter, quoting here, Pat 25, do you have the CRJ in sight? In reference, of course, to the passenger aircraft. Tower, did you see that? Another pilot is heard calling seconds after the apparent collision. The tower immediately began diverting other aircraft from Reagan. So it appears there was some concern going in as to whether the Black Hawk helicopter had seen or could see this plane that was clearly on final approach. Kyle.
That is correct, Trace. Good evening. Those helicopters are operating at very low altitudes. And, as you were discussing earlier with the PSA Airlines descending, it's very difficult to see if that's directly below you. The aircraft doesn't have windows on the bottom, obviously. So it's in kind of a scenario, and then there's water down there also. So a lot of times it's very difficult with the city lights. You're in a very, for lack of a better term, an urban area with city lights, rivers. It's often very hard to distinguish navigation lights and strobe lights on something that's over water or around vicinity of a lot of other lights. So it looks like the helicopter probably was operating on what is known as Helicopter Route 1 for Washington National. And typically, the military pretty much operates with, extreme precision, at low altitude. They're doing this all the time. But the responsibility is on both parties. It would be on the aircraft as well as, the helicopter as well for, being aware of what's around you. And both aircraft should have a traffic collision avoidance system, TCAS. Mm-hmm. But, I have to say, too, there's sometimes even on the commercial end, a little bit of over-relying on these complex systems that we have. Right. And quite often, that the pilot's eyes really aren't searching the skies like they should be. And I'm not saying it was a helicopter or the airplane, but just something to factor in. But the fact that you're in such a densely populated area, obviously plays a factor with those lights. I mean, even, you're approaching these runways at nighttime with these lights. It's often hard to even see runway lights with, the bright lights of the city on a dark winter night. It's difficult.
Yeah, I want to read this to you, Kyle, and maybe you can glean some information from it. It says American Airlines Flight 5342 was inbound. Of course, it was PSA flying under the American Airlines label. Flight 5342 was inbound to Reagan National at an altitude of about 400 feet and a speed of about 140 miles per hour when it suffered a rapid loss of altitude over the Potomac River, according to data from its radio transponder. The Canadian-made Bombardier CRJ 701 twin-engine jet manufactured in 2004 and can be configured to carry up to 70 passengers. So when you hear that at 400 feet, you talk about a helicopter that might be coming up, and all the dials and warning systems in the world, Kyle, it's going to be very difficult for a pilot at 400 feet moving 140 miles per hour to try and get away somehow, would it not be, from a helicopter that was rising into it?
That is true, and the aircraft obviously have less maneuverability than the helicopter does. So it looks like the aircraft, the PSA Airlines operating on behalf of American Airlines, it looks like it was approaching runway 33 from the southwest to the northwest, and you almost could see the airplane in a banking turn. So, that complicates things a little bit also, as far as, having a clear picture of the horizon. Plus, he's descending. So, visibility, I mean, that vision out those cockpit windows is obviously a little bit obstructed, being in that banking turn, descending towards the runway at nighttime.
Yeah, and if you put these two together, it kind of paints a different picture. We now have the video, Kyle. We have seen that. You can see the explosion. Really hard to tell where exactly the helicopter hit, if it was coming from the side, if it was coming from below. Really hard to tell because we just don't have that. But if you put these together and you have the audio from the air traffic control tower around the time of the crash that is asking the helicopter, do you have the CRJ in sight? Concern right there. And then you have the other thing where the American Airlines Flight 5342 inbound, altitude 400 feet, speed of about 140 miles per hour. So they're clearly concerned from the tower about whether or not this plane has the helicopter in sight and vice versa. Or take that back. The helicopter has the plane in sight, and it's unclear if the plane was contacted, or if they had time to contact the plane and say, watch out below or watch out from the side, Kyle.
Yeah, and also, too, when you're operating on a helicopter route at very low altitude, you're usually, you're looking straight ahead as a helicopter pilot and looking down, looking for, low-level flying aircraft. You're usually under the assumption that what's above you in that controlled airspace, in close proximity to a very busy airport, that the threat normally would be coming from below you or from in front of you. And it's very interesting. And then with the aircraft, on top, with the blind spot below there, sort of. But with technology the way it is today, it's just amazing that with, the bells and whistles that we have in both aircraft today that this could happen. We haven't had, besides the Colgan crash, we haven't had a large U.S.-based airline, a large cabin aircraft crash since shortly after September 11th.
Right.
Other than the Colgan crash. And when I say large cabin, I mean like a 737 or something of this size. But over the years, the regional jets have gotten bigger and bigger and bigger. 20 years ago, an airplane this size would be similar to what was a DC-9 back in the 1970s or 1980s. So, people looking at the media and seeing small airplane or regional jet, you don't want to be confused. This is a fairly large aircraft. I mean, right. Holding in excess of 70 passengers. We're talking, a lot of people. And usually in instances like this, sadly, in midair collisions, you normally have a lot of fatalities if in fact there were bodies pulled from the water, survivors, that really might be just a glimmer of decent news in, this horrible right. situation. But normally when midair collision goes through my mind, normally you would expect no survivors.
Kyle, stand by if you would for me. We've got correspondents on the ground, both Chad Pergram and Mark Meredith. We're going to get updates from both. Let's begin with Mark Meredith, who's got a major update from the airport. Mark, what are you learning?
Trace, I can now see that there are 3 areas that have been set up around the airport, kind of a search and rescue starting point, if you will. We see 2 areas across the Potomac, which would be on the D.C. and or Maryland side of the river. And then here on the Virginia side, on the runway on the south side of the airport, if you were kind of coming in, if you were landing, you would be coming in towards Washington. We could see a large array of emergency vehicles that had been stationed there before, but then we saw a rush of them within the last about 5 minutes or so that started heading even further into the airfield up against the water. Because of the way Reagan Airport is set up, the runways run right up against the water in itself. We also know that the new Secretary of Transportation, Sean Duffy, who I believe was just sworn in either yesterday or last night, is now on scene as well, obviously trying to get abreast of what's happening, as well as the FAA and the NTSB. We've also heard from the new Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, who says he's also aware of the situation and monitoring what's going on, as well as D.C.'s Mayor Muriel Bowser just now offering prayers and support. From what we have seen out here, though, this has become the new gathering point of people can look out across the Potomac to see the search and rescue efforts underway. I've seen more helicopters above within the last 20 minutes or so than I was an hour ago when I first got out here, but these helicopters, they are still fairly high, Trace. They're still at 300 or 400 feet above the air. They are not necessarily right there skimming the water. Instead, what we can see is, just because it's so bright with the emergency lights that are out there, is these multiple staging points right up against the Potomac, where it's likely that they'll continue to dispatch resources out of there. We have heard again from the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration, that this was a CRJ 700, which is a regional jet that the major airlines fly, American, Delta, United, through their regional carriers. This one out of Wichita, Kansas. We know that members of the Kansas congressional delegation have been made aware of what's going on. A lot of them were already in town, at least the Senate side were already in town, and some of them also making their way out here to the crash site and trying to figure out what's happening from there. We also know that the NTSB, Trace, the National Transportation Safety Board, will be the one leading this agency, but you can imagine all of the other government agencies have an all-hands-on-deck situation. But as I look out again across the Potomac, what's so notable to me is just how many of these emergency vehicles are stationed all across, trying to figure out exactly where they're going to have to go. And I think it's quite notable is that the helicopters, that they continue to search up against the Potomac coastline itself with their searchlights on, an indication that they're potentially looking for anything that may have washed up on shore. Obviously, after this crash happened around 8:50 or so this evening, some time has passed. That wreckage, debris, and God forbid anybody who may have survived has likely moved further away from the crash site. We've been looking, Trace, at some of the flight radar applications that are on iPhones that basically allow you to go back in time and look at what an aircraft was doing. Where this aircraft was landing was coming near National Harbor, which is a community on the Maryland side of town, and then it looks looks like as it was coming in, there was also aircraft departing DCA. Totally normal. We see aircraft depart every 30 to 45 seconds out of this airport. It's a very busy airport. As you and your guests were just talking about, it's also home to a lot of regional jets, which this is because obviously they're able to fly in and out easier. They can also make it a lot easier to get more flights out of this airport as opposed to just going to the major hubs like Atlanta or Miami. This flight coming from Wichita, not a hub for American or their regional subsidiaries, but DCA is, and there was likely a lot of people that were coming in on this aircraft. We're still waiting for the official word on how many people might have been on board. But Trace, I also want to mention here, because of the way that the city is set up, where this airport is, it's in the heart of everything. It doesn't really matter where you are. You can see the aircraft's either coming or going. DC has height restrictions on their buildings, so obviously you can see the air traffic from miles away. So what we have seen from some of those webcam shots is the collision itself. It looks like the fireball when the helicopter and the regional jet collided with themselves. I wouldn't be shocked if we'll see more videos in the next hours and days ahead, because there was so much focused on this airport itself. All of our local stations have cameras out here. They use it for weather shots, so there was likely a lot of video out there. I was curious, Trace, I don't see any of the aircraft that would have been taxiing that may have been stuck on the tarmac. It looks like maybe all of those aircraft have been able to go back to their gates. Even though it was later in the evening on a Wednesday evening, flights still go out of Reagan fairly late, at least until the 10, 11 o'clock hour. But it looks like all those aircraft that may have been stuck on the tarmac have been able to return to their gates right now. We are still waiting another update from the FAA and the NTSB, Trace, but I can hear it up above. You can hear those helicopters searching right now in the dead of night, trying to find anybody who may have survived this horrific crash. Trace.
Yeah,